Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 10 of the CSS playlist. And in our previous lesson we had looked at the concept of the CSS height and width property. In this particular lesson we want to look at the concept of the CSS box model. And what is a box model? The box model is what defines the space of the HTML element and the space around the HTML element. So when you create any particular HTML element, that element takes up some space on the browser, and that space is defined or modeled using the CSS box model. The CSS box model consists of the four main parts, and that you can say the HTML element consists of the four parts. So every HTML element has the content which is within the element. Then by default it also has the padding, and the padding is the space around the content. And then the element also has a border, and the border is the line around that element. And then the element also has the margin, and the margin specifies the space between the element or the space around the element. So you can see all these three components form up the HTML element, and this is what we are calling it the box model. And therefore when you are defining the width or the height of any HTML element, what you need to know is that you are just defining the height and the width of the content area. So here it says that, for example, if you look at this def element, this is an HTML element, we are specifying the width as 300 pixels, the border, the padding, and the margin. And therefore when you look at this, you could say when you set the width and the height properties of an element with the CSS, you are just setting the width and the height of the content area. So this 300 pixels refers to the width of this content area up to here. And then we're also specifying the border as 15 pixels, so the 15 pixel is the border right here. And then the margin, the margin is the space from the border up to this line right here. And then the padding is now the distance between the border and the content. With that said, if therefore you want to get the total width or the total height of any element, then you have to also include the width and the padding and the border measurements. For example, in this our def element, if someone asks you to calculate the total width of this element, then the total width will be 300 pixels plus border 15 pixels times 2, because we have border on this side 15 pixel and also on this side 15 pixels, and then plus the padding, which is 50 pixels times 2. Why? Because we also have padding on this side, it is 50 pixels, and on this side is also 50 pixels. And then that will give you the total width or the total height of that particular element. Please note also that the margin is not included in calculating the total width of the box. But despite that, it also affects the space the element takes up on the page. So because it affects the space taken by an element on the page, it also forms part of the box model. But when you are calculating the total height or the total width of the element, you cannot include the width, the margin property. So here you will consider the padding, the content, and the border. So with that said, I want to pause this lesson here. It was all about explaining the concept of CSS box model and seeing how it affects the size or the width and the height of an element on the page. In our next lesson, we will look at the CSS text properties. Otherwise, thank you for joining this lesson and see you in our next lesson.